I learned the truth about the two of them the way you learn the worst things in life, in a moment that feels ordinary until it explodes. It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind that smelled like coffee and traffic, the kind that usually held nothing more alarming than a missed call or a burned toast. I had gone into my father's office for what I told myself was a quick conversation about the seating chart, about the band, about whether his aunt should be seated near the front or at the back. The wedding was 3 days away. The whole town had been talking for months. Oliver, my Oliver, had said yes the summer after I returned from deployment, and for 6 months the world had been painted in small, steady shades of love. We made plans, lists, spreadsheets. We fought about napkins and laughed while ugwung about the best band for the reception. I believed I was building a life. The office door was ajar. My father always left it that way, as if it proved he had nothing to hide. The afternoon sun fell straight through the blinds and painted the floor in stripes. The mahogany looked warm. My feet made soft sounds on the rug. I told myself I would pop in, double-check the florist, and be gone. They were not alone. What I heard first was not words. It was fabric against skin, and the small, careless laughter that convinced me 1,000 small betrayals could be true. Then I heard their voices, my father's, lower, softer than I had ever heard it, and Oliver's, higher, breathy with some private amusement. The way the laughter overlapped with that voice, it felt like my ribs being pressed in from the inside. I remember the exact tilt of the chair, the way the light threw their silhouettes across the floor, and the way silence itself felt like a knife. You expect a discovery to be loud, a thunderclap, a cinematic revelation. Mine was the opposite. It was intimate, slow, domestic, and worse, normal. My father clearing his throat, Oliver saying something like, "Don't be ridiculous," in that voice that had once told me she loved me. The betrayal was made worse by its ordinariness. They were not caught in a lie to be hidden later. They were participating in an ordinary secret, the kind people call an affair when they reveal it to strangers, but in private it's just a habit, a routine, a second life. For a long time I stood in the doorway without moving. Everything distant, the list, the band, the vows, everything receded into a soundless fog. I could have left. I could have burst in and ended it all at once. I could have raised my voice and demanded an explanation. But I did not. I had seen men in attempts to save themselves from the world, men in my unit who reacted with knives and fists, men who could not stand the thought of weakness. In the quiet that fell over me, I made a decision I still do not fully understand. I walked away. I went home, I sat on the couch, and I let the apartment fill me up with its small, boring smells. The kettle boiled. The TV droned a late afternoon show. I ate a sandwich without tasting it. All the while I was listening to the echo of their laughter in the office as if it had been recorded and replayed inside my head. The ring on my finger suddenly felt like a tiny tombstone. I was not a passive man. I had done things that required a toughness I do not need to list, because the people who hear those things always want to tell you about their courage like it gets them out of the present. But there is a difference between making yourself endure things because you have no choice and choosing to endure because you are plotting. That evening, when Oliver left my calls unanswered and my father pretended the world had not shifted on its axis, I knew what I would do. I waited. People act in ways terrible and brave when their lives sit on a scale. You can lash out, you can beg, you can run, or you can hold the most painful truth close to your chest and use the hour it affords you. My decision to wait until the altar was not born of a calm mind. It was a mixture of cold fury and precise calculation. If I had exploded the moment I knew, they would have written it off as the rage of a jilted man. If I had tried to negotiate, to bargain the life I believed I deserved, they would have told some strangers that I was unreasonable, unstable. But on the altar, at the center of everyone's gaze, the place where vows are solemn and the air is absolutely thick with expectation, I could do something else. I could force the world to watch as everything they had concealed unspooled. In the days that followed, I moved through our world like an actor playing at Serenity. Oliver continued to smile in a way that did not reach her eyes. She asked me about butternars and invited me to rehearsal dinners where I sat with one hand on the table and the other twisting my napkin into knots. My father did what fathers who believe themselves untouchable do. He bought stronger wine, he invited more people, and he acted as though the sun would rise on wedding day the same as any other day. Around them, the town hummed like a beehive. People wore white dresses and powder and asked me in pleasant voices how I felt. None of them had any idea about the small, dangerous, domestic thing that had slid like a slug under the rug of our lives. You learn how to read people quickly when you have been trained to spot the tiny truths. Soldiers speak with hands and small gestures. They do not always say what they mean, but their faces tell you the rest. I began watching my father the way I used to watch a target in boot camp. Where is his attention? Who gets his eye? I noticed the way he cleared his throat when he saw Oliver walk into a room, the way his laughter burbled at the wrong times, not the laugh of a proud father, but the laugh of a man who wants to be reassured of his conspirator. My suspicion hardened into evidence in small, jagged slices. A hidden coffee receipt under a desk, a lipstick stain on the underside of the armrest of his chair, a name in his phone that he dismissed too quickly as a business contact. Oliver herself changed in tiny ways. She would reach for my hand in the middle of the night and then jerk away as if she had miscalculated her motion. She would make plans for our life trips, chairs for a nursery in a tone that sounded rehearsed. Once at the florist's, her laugh cracked while she looked at a particular bouquet and she said, "My," and then stopped and said nothing. It was as if she had rehearsed how to be part of a story she no longer believed. My best friend Marco said later that he had seen me as I signed the final supplier contracts and thought I looked like a man with a secret. "You were too quiet," he said. I lied and said I had tactical nerves. That was true in a way I did not tell him. I was conserving energy. There is an ugly psychological weight to waiting. It requires you to live in two worlds at once, the one you show to others and the one where you fold and refold the truth in the dark. At night I replayed the day I walked into my father's office. I pictured Olivia's mouth forming the words she used with him, as though she were talking to a confidant rather than my future husband. I imagined how casually they would set about pretending it had never happened if they could only stop me from pulling the thread, and I plotted. My plan was never about humiliation for the sake of humiliation. People who seek only to wound often hurt themselves most. This was about justice. This was about dismantling, in public, the architecture of lies they had built. I wanted the community to see truth, and to know what kind of people had been standing in their midst. I wanted the faces of the men and women who applauded to twist when they realized the applause had been for a staged fraud. The day of the rehearsal, I walked through the motions, placing the chairs, checking the aisle. I watched as my father stood and made to deliver a speech filled with the platitudes of proud family. He spoke about legacy and continuity and the binding strength of our clan. I felt bile rise in my throat. After the speech, he clasped his hands and looked at Olivia as a man looks towards a ship that will carry him to a new continent. It made me sick. There were moments when cowardice hovered over me like a vulture. I imagined Olivia's face crumpling, my family reduced to ruin. I imagined police officers and headlines and my name trampled as the man who destroyed a wedding. But then I remembered scenes of my father's hands, the way they had slapped my back when I returned home from the region, the way those palms had wrapped my shoulder and seemed calloused with affection. Those same hands had caressed a different neck and built a secret life. That memory cooled the soft parts of me into stone. On the eve of the wedding, my father told me to sleep in my old room. "Nerves," he said. "You want to be fresh for tomorrow." He patted my shoulder in that public father way that is so carefully performed it is almost an insult. I took the room because it was easier than arguing, easier than telling a man to go rot. The room smelled of antique polish and something older, the smell of a family that believes everything can be polished until it gleams. I lay awake until dawn, reviewing every piece of small proof I had gathered. I had recordings, faint, inconclusive, but suggestive. I had receipts and photographs taken with a small camera I hid in my watch while posing like a man checking his cufflinks. I had a note, a crumpled little thing Olivia had left on the kitchen counter weeks ago, ostensibly for me, which I had kept. The note was a traitor's breadcrumb. Stay calm, soon. It meant nothing on its own. It meant everything when coupled with the coffee receipts and the lipstick stain. Some people would call me monstrous for what I planned. They would say that the altar is a place of sacred vows, not justice. I agree in theory. But when vows are used as currency, and when sacredness is a prop for private gain, the altar stops being sacred. The place that was supposed to bind two people honestly bound them together in a far uglier web. So I chose the altar because it amplified truth. I chose it because nothing quiet breaks the heaviest silence like a public reckoning. The morning of the wedding arrived like a slow tide. The sky was clear, as though the world had conspired to keep its ordinary beauty, to mock the furious, human details it covered. Guests arrived in gleaming shoes and careful smiles. Flowers were arranged exactly where the florist recommended. The pianist tuned his piano until each note was sweet and perfect. People hugged me in the way you touch something fragile and hope it does not shatter. Olivia floated by in the dress I had helped pick. A dress, she had said, made her feel like a princess. In one photo, the dress did make her look luminous. In another light, shielded from a camera, it looked like armor. My father moved among our guests with the practiced ease of a man who understands how to be loved on command. He stood at the front of the crowd, speaking with a family friend, sipping a drink. When he looked at me, his face was steady, smiling as if he believed the whole script. A man in his position could not imagine the invisible lethal current that now passed between us. When the ceremony began, a hush fell over the crowd. There is a certain electric silence at weddings, the kind of silence that expects a story to be told, some version of promise or proverb delivered for the memory of all present. I walked down the aisle with my father at my arm because he, in public, had decided that his role as a father and his role as a conspirator could exist at once, and he would be forgiven by ceremony. The music swelled. Olivia looked beautiful and fragile, and full of the universe of promises she had nothing to intend to keep. At the altar I felt the weight of every eye, the ballooning pressure of legacy and gossip and people's hunger for spectacle. I had rehearsed my lines in the bathroom mirror when no one was listening, spoken vows I intended to keep even if everything else fell. My palms were steady because the plan shut off my fear. There was, for a sliver of a second, a ridiculous and human desire to salvage the night in some small, private way, to say my vows and mean them and fold whatever had been done back into something honest. That thought evaporated as quickly as it had come. The priest began. My father squeezed my hand in that public father grip he used to see off clients. I took a breath. It was time. I wanted not to scream but to arrive at peace, to let the shock I intended be clean and undeniable. I smiled at Olivia, a slow, sad smile, and she smiled back like a woman who has kept a secret she thinks will protect her. What I did next was not born of cruelty. It was born of a decision that truth, when it is allowed to run away in private, must be pulled back into public. I nodded at the priest to pause, and without a tremor I reached into my pocket and took out the phone with the recordings I had stitched together, the small, sharp sentences, the overlapping laughter. I played them. At first the sound seemed impossible in a place of vows, a tape of two voices, casual, ordinary, discussing days like they were plans in a calendar. Olivia laughed into the speaker. My father's voice said, in a tone coated with the smallest intimacy, "Tomorrow, no one has to know." The murmur that followed felt like a physical thing. Seats creaked as bodies moved. Women's fingers fumbled kerchiefs. Children looked around in confusion. Across the aisle my mother went pale and then furious. Olivia's face, for the first time that day, crumpled into real shock. My father's eyes went hollow. I had expected gasps. I had expected a rising tidal wave of shame and rage and hurried explanations. I had also expected denials. People always deny when their private life gets aired. But what I had not expected, and what will live on in my mind forever, was the way the room watched me then, as if waiting to see which of us I would be. The man who broke the moment into silence, or the man who let it stay that way and disappear. I remember standing at the altar and feeling a curious, terrible calm. I had robbed myself of an easy life when I chose to wait. I had stolen the moment when people look to a couple and believe in the future, the way children believe in fairy tales. But the truth had been stolen from me for months, and I intended the return to be as loud as anyone would remember. What happened after the first recording played is not something that can be put back together into neat sentences. Words tumbled like broken glass. There were cries and then a rush of people, some to the doors, others to my side as if to see whether I had been broken by what I had done. Olivia, sobbing, clutched her dress. My father put his head in his hands like a man trying to hide the shame of old wet clothes. The priest stopped, his collar bunched, his face bewildered. Somewhere a child began to wail. In that chaos I felt none of the triumph some might have imagined. The sound of those voices, voices I had loved and trusted, shredded honesty. I had given the town a spectacle. I had given myself a sentence. But there was a brittle, clean thing about the way everything had fallen. No more rumors that faded into polite conversation. No more secrets shared in the dark corners of a man's study. From now on, they would have to answer in light. Later, people would point to different moments as the reason everything collapsed. Some said it was my cruelty to choose the altar. Others said it was bravery. My mother cried in a room alone for an hour and whispered my name like an accusation. My father left without speaking to his guests. Olivia fled before the cake was cut, slipping out with a bag she had not packed for any honeymoon. People clustered in small groups and tried to name who was to blame. I stood alone at the altar, with the echo of recorded laughter still ringing in my ears. That night, after guests had trickled away and the last of the lights in the hall were dimmed, a man not drunk so much as hollowed by awkwardness came to stand by my car. He told me in a voice too small and fragile for his size that he had loved my mother once and had never forgiven himself for things he did not do right. He apologized in a way that was not really an apology. I listened because it was easier than talking. His words did not change anything. None of them did. I expected the town to turn against me after the scandal, to brand me as a man who ruined a wedding. They did not. Some hated me. Some, in secret, sent messages of support saying they had suspected as much. Some neighbors pretended nothing had happened and asked me in the bodeg, the day after, whether I wanted a grill for a housewarming. What I expected least of all was the way the silence from within my own head continued. The recordings had done what I wanted. They had forced a truth into sunlight. But daylight does not make pain evaporate. It only changes the way it sits on the skin. I have been asked, more times than I can count, whether I would do it again, whether I would choose that particular brand of exposure instead of a quieter justice. There are nights when I close my eyes and imagine another life, one where I walked into the office and confronted them and they shattered and we all walked away maimed but honest. Then there are nights when I listen to the sound of silence and know that what I did was necessary. The altar was a crucible, and crucibles are not gentle. This chapter of my life closed with Olivia gone, and my father fat with the knowledge that his hands had turned the world he built into a stage for his appetite. People changed their opinions in grocery store lines, and children asked questions they were not meant to ask. My phone filled with messages I opened and did not answer. Some of them were brutal. Some of them, as odd as it felt, were grateful. I do not claim I did right. I claim I did what I thought would return something stolen to me, the power to choose my life, and worse and truer, the power to witness the truth. The next day a reporter called. The week after a local pastor preached about forgiveness. Months later I would find out what Olivia had said to my father in whispers and what promises he had made. That discovery would be a different kind of knife. For now, the wedding lay broken behind me like a mirror that had been thrown. People sweep up glass. People forget the way it cuts under the skin. I did not sweep. I kept the pieces to remind myself that the truth, once let go in the public headlight, is a hostility that will not easily be rewoven into a lie. And so I stand here, telling you not to judge the man who made the choice to reveal. There is a cost to letting a private wound fester. There is a cost to scarring your own life so that you may live an honest one. If I had to answer for my methods to a tribunal of conscience, I would say only this: I chose the loudest, because silence had already stolen too much. The morning after I discovered the truth about my father and my fiancée, I woke up with a numbness that clung to my skin like frost. My bed felt foreign, the walls of my apartment suffocating, and every shadow seemed to whisper betrayal. I couldn't escape the images of them together, the way his hand touched her waist, the way she tilted her head and smiled as if I had never existed. Those visions drilled themselves into my mind like hot nails. I wanted to scream, to break everything around me, but my body was frozen with disbelief. I looked at my phone, messages from friends, family, co-workers, asking if I was excited about the wedding, if I was nervous, if I needed anything. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. They didn't know. Nobody knew what I had seen, what I had learned. The world thought I was about to marry the woman of my dreams, while in reality, the woman of my dreams had become the nightmare I could never wake up from. And my father, my own father, the man who had taught me how to tie a tie, who had given me advice on women, who had always said he wanted the best for me, the man who was supposed to stand by me at the altar, was the same man who had stolen the only thing that mattered to me. My chest ached with a pressure that felt like it might crush my ribs. But then something else began to stir inside me. Anger, pure molten anger that threatened to burn me alive. I clenched my fists, and the sheets beneath my hands wrinkled as if they too could feel the rage pulsing through me. I whispered into the empty room, my voice raw and hoarse. They don't get to destroy me. Not like this. Not without consequences. That day I didn't cry. I didn't break. Instead, I began to plan. Every wedding has an audience, a stage, a spotlight. And if they wanted to humiliate me in secret, I would humiliate them in public. I would make them feel the weight of shame, the sting of betrayal, the same way they had poisoned my heart. I started small. I pulled out the wedding invitations I had saved, reading each name of the guests who would soon sit in polished rows, dressed in their best clothes, waiting to see two lovers unite. Except what they would see was something entirely different. The thought made my pulse quicken with a dark thrill. I wasn't just going to ruin their affair. I was going to ruin their reputations, their futures, their carefully crafted lies. Late at night, when the city was silent and even my neighbor's lights had gone out, I sat at my desk writing notes. Letters that revealed truths, words sharpened into blades. I didn't know if I would hand them out at the wedding or slip them into purses and coat pockets, but every letter carried the venom I needed the world to taste. But more than letters, I needed proof. Proof that no one could deny, so I began to dig. Their phones, their photos, their messages. I knew my father well enough to guess his weaknesses: late-night drinking, careless moments, arrogance that blinded him to consequences. And my fiancée, God, I couldn't even say her name without bitterness. She was even easier. She loved her secrets but always left traces, like perfume that lingers on clothes long after the person is gone. I hacked into her cloud account. The screen lit up with hundreds of photos, messages, videos, and there it was, him, my father. His hands on her, their smiles caught in frozen moments they thought would stay hidden forever. I stared at those images until my jaw hurt from grinding my teeth. My stomach twisted, but alongside the pain there was triumph. They had given me exactly what I needed. Every detail mattered. The way his tie was loosened, the champagne glass in her hand, the hotel curtains behind them. I saved everything. Each file was a weapon, each message a bullet waiting to be fired. Still, the hardest part wasn't gathering evidence. It was pretending. Pretending I didn't know. Pretending when my father called to check on me. Pretending when she kissed me goodnight as if her lips weren't already stained with his betrayal. Pretending when my mother asked if I was happy, her eyes glowing with pride. My entire life had become a theater play, and I was the actor forced to smile while bleeding behind the curtains. The days passed in a blur. Every tick of the clock brought me closer to the wedding day. My suit hung in the corner of my room, its pristine fabric mocking me, waiting for a ceremony that was no longer about love but about revenge. and though part of me trembled with fear of exposure, fear of what would happen when the truth exploded, another part of me thrived on the anticipation. The more I imagined their faces when I revealed everything, the more alive I felt. Sometimes I wondered if I had already lost myself, if the Tim who once dreamed of love, family, and a peaceful life was gone forever, replaced by this darker version who craved vengeance. But then I remembered her laugh in my father's arms, and any doubt vanished. The night before the wedding, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. My eyes were hollow, my expression sharp. I looked older, harder, like I had aged 10 years in a week. I tightened my tie just to see how it felt and whispered to my reflection, "Tomorrow, everything changes. Tomorrow, they'll see who I've become." I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, watching the city glow with neon lights, cars weaving through the darkness. I thought about the guests, about the vows I was supposed to say, about the cake and the flowers and the music. And then I thought about the silence that would follow once the truth dropped like a bomb in the middle of it all. The betrayal had destroyed the man I once was, but the revenge I was planning, it was about to create someone entirely new. And none of them were ready for it. The morning of the wedding arrived like a storm that had been building on the horizon for weeks. My body felt heavy, my mind racing with thoughts that collided into each other like waves crashing against sharp rocks. When I opened my eyes, sunlight filtered through the curtains, but instead of warmth, it felt like a spotlight, exposing every secret I carried. Today wasn't just a wedding day. Today was the day the masks would fall. I rose from the bed and stood in front of the mirror. The man staring back at me didn't look like a groom. He looked like a soldier preparing for battle. My suit hung ready, its crisp black fabric flawless, the tie perfectly ironed, the shoes polished until they gleamed like obsidian. On the surface, everything screamed perfection. But inside, I was a hurricane of rage, anticipation, and a satisfaction that bordered on madness. My phone buzzed with messages, friends wishing me luck, my mother reminding me not to be late, the wedding planner checking the details. Among them, one message stood out. It was from her. "I can't wait to see you at the altar. My fiancé, my betrayer." My stomach twisted at her words, but I forced myself to smile. The irony of her pretending, the sheer audacity of her acting as if she hadn't destroyed me, fueled me more than anything else. I slipped my watch onto my wrist, the same one my father had given me on my 21st birthday. The irony burned, a gift from the man who had stolen what mattered most. I tightened the strap and whispered to myself, "You'll regret every choice you made." The venue was already buzzing when I arrived. Guests in elegant dresses and tailored suits mingled, laughter and champagne flowing freely. White roses decorated every corner, soft music drifted through the air, and for everyone else it was a perfect celebration. But for me it was a stage. Every flower, every candle, every smile, it was all just decoration for the execution I had planned. I walked through the crowd, forcing a calm expression onto my face, nodding at familiar faces, shaking hands, accepting congratulations. Inside, my chest burned with the weight of secrets. I looked at my father standing near the bar, his charm on full display as he entertained relatives. His laughter was deep, confident, shameless. Did he feel no guilt? Did he truly believe he could steal my fiancée and then toast to my future without consequences? My hands itched to shatter his glass right there, but I held back. Patience, timing, precision. Then my eyes found her, my bride. She stood at the far end of the hall, surrounded by bridesmaids, her white dress glowing under the lights. She looked like an angel, but I knew the truth. She was poison wrapped in silk. Our eyes met for a brief moment. She smiled, and for the first time I didn't smile back. Minutes blurred into hours as the ceremony approached. I rehearsed every step in my mind. The music, the vows, the moment when silence would fall. My heart pounded not with love, but with the thrill of revenge. Finally, the time came. I stood at the altar, my best man at my side, the officiant ready, the crowd seated in perfect rows, all eyes on me. The doors opened and she walked in, her veil floating, her bouquet clutched tightly. Gasps of admiration filled the hall, whispers of how beautiful she looked. But all I heard was the pounding of my own heartbeat. She reached me, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it in mine. Her touch sent a chill through my veins. I looked at her face, at the veil hiding the expression I once adored. And then I looked past her to where my father stood in the front row, his smile wide, his pride radiating like a spotlight. The officiant began to speak. Words about love, commitment, forever. My mind barely registered them. I was waiting for the moment, the exact second to strike. "Do you, Tim, take?" I raised my hand, interrupting. The room fell silent, every head turned, every eye locked onto me. My fiancée's smile faltered, confusion flickering in her eyes. My father's laughter died, his expression stiffening. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my jacket. My hands didn't tremble. My voice was steady, sharp, every syllable cutting through the air. "Before I answer that, there's something everyone here deserves to know." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I unfolded the paper slowly, deliberately, savoring the tension that thickened like smoke. I spoke of love, of trust, of betrayal. I spoke of secrets kept in the dark, of promises broken. And then, with deliberate calm, I revealed the truth, that the woman standing beside me had been sharing her vows not only with me, but with my own father. The hall erupted in shock. Murmurs, cries, shouts. My fiancée's face drained of color, her lips parting but no words escaping. My father stood frozen, his charm shattered, his mask ripped away. But I wasn't finished. From my pocket I pulled out the proof. Photos, screenshots, evidence undeniable. I held them high for all to see, the whispers turning into gasps of horror. Relatives covered their mouths, friends exchanged horrified glances, some even stood from their seats in disbelief. My bride tried to grab my arm, her voice trembling. "Tim, please, stop." But I shook her off. "Stop, you stopped being my bride the moment you chose him." My words echoed like thunder. I turned to my father. His face was red, his jaw tight, his body rigid. For once in his life he had no words, no clever excuses. He was exposed, naked in his betrayal before everyone who once admired him. The officiant stood frozen, the ceremony forgotten. The music had stopped, all that remained was chaos. And in the middle of it all, I smiled. A small, cold smile that wasn't about joy or victory, but about release. The truth was out, the chains were broken. I dropped the photos onto the floor, letting them scatter like ashes. I looked at the guests, at the shattered faces, at the family that would never be whole again. And I said, with a calmness that silenced even the loudest whispers, "This wedding is over, but the show has only just begun." And as I walked away from the altar, leaving them in ruins, I felt lighter than I had in months. They thought they had destroyed me, but in truth I had destroyed them. The air outside the church was thick with whispers, gasps, and the sound of shattering illusions. Behind me, chaos reigned. Inside, I had left a wreckage of vows, promises, and carefully curated appearances. I walked out into the sunlight, my shoes striking the steps like a drum beat, every step echoing finality. For the first time in months, I felt control flowing back into my veins. But control is a fragile thing, and revenge has a way of taking more from you than you ever expected. I didn't go home. Instead, I went to the hotel suite that was supposed to be our wedding night hideaway. The irony of it almost made me laugh. The champagne on ice, the bed covered with rose petals, the balcony overlooking the city, it was all waiting for a fairy tale that would never happen. I loosened my tie, sat down in the chair by the window, and poured myself a glass of the expensive champagne. The bubbles rose like tiny ghosts, fragile and fleeting, much like the love I thought I had. My phone exploded with messages, friends demanding explanations, cousins stunned into disbelief, some offering support, others condemning me for ruining the wedding, and then there were the messages from her, my so-called bride, long paragraphs of desperate apologies, voice messages dripping with tears. She begged me to meet her, to listen, to forgive. But forgiveness was not on the menu anymore, not after what she and my father had done. I ignored them all until one name appeared on the screen, Dad. I stared at it for a long time, the word burning into my eyes. My finger hovered over the answer button, but I let it ring until it stopped. For the first time in his life, he wanted to explain himself, and for the first time I didn't care to hear it. But the story wasn't over. Exposing them at the altar was only the beginning. What they didn't know was that I had prepared for this day meticulously. Evidence, witnesses, legal traps, everything was in place. My revenge wasn't about humiliation alone. It was about destruction, and destruction takes time. Later that night, there was a knock at the hotel door. When I opened it, she was there, veil gone, makeup smudged, her white dress wrinkled and stained with tears. "Tim," she whispered, her voice raw, "please, we need to talk." I stepped aside silently, letting her in. She paced the room like a caged animal, her hands shaking, her words spilling out too fast. "I made a mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen. Your father, he pressured me, he manipulated me. I swear it wasn't love. I still love you, only you." Her excuses hit me like smoke, thick, choking, impossible to breathe through. I stared at her, my silence louder than any scream. Finally, I asked, "Do you even hear yourself? You betrayed me with my father, and now you expect me to believe you were powerless." Tears streamed down her cheeks. She reached for my hand, but I pulled back. "Tim, I was scared. I thought if I said no, he'd ruin us. You know what he's capable of. Please believe me, I never wanted this." For a second, doubt flickered in my chest. My father was a powerful man, always used to getting his way. But then I remembered the photos, the messages, the looks of satisfaction on both their faces. This wasn't manipulation. This was choice. I stood, towering over her, my voice cold as steel. "You had a choice, and you chose him. That's all I need to know." Her sobs filled the room, but I felt nothing. No pity, no sorrow, only clarity. She fell to her knees, clutching at my legs, begging, pleading, but I stepped away, leaving her collapsed on the floor like a broken doll. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the city lights blur into the darkness, plotting my next move. Exposing them publicly was satisfying, but it wasn't enough. My father still had his wealth, his reputation, his empire. My ex-bride still had her beauty, her charm, her network of friends willing to believe her lies. If I stopped now, they would rebuild, they would move on, and I couldn't let that happen. The following morning, I contacted Michael, my lawyer, my oldest friend, and one of the few people I could still trust. Over coffee, I laid everything out, the affair, the evidence, the betrayal. His eyes widened, but he didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "Tim, you don't just want revenge, you want annihilation." "Exactly," I replied. Michael nodded slowly. "Then we'll hit them where it hurts, not just their hearts, their wallets, their reputation, their entire foundation." We drew up plans, lawsuits that would bleed my father's company dry, leaks to the press that would shred his image, strategic whispers to investors, partners, friends. As for her, I had enough proof to ensure she would never be welcomed in the same social circles again. Every door that once opened for her would slam shut. Days turned into weeks, each move calculated, each strike precise, and with every headline, every loss, every whisper of scandal, I watched them crumble. My father's name, once respected, became a curse. My ex-bride, once adored, became a pariah. But vengeance is a strange thing. The more I destroyed them, the more I felt the emptiness inside me grow. I had expected victory to taste sweet, but instead it was bitter like ash. Friends avoided me, whispering that I had gone too far. Even Michael warned me, "Tim, be careful. Revenge consumes the avenger." One night, after another long day of watching their downfall unfold, I returned to my apartment to find a letter slipped under my door. No name, no address, just one sentence written in trembling handwriting. "You've made your point. When will it be enough?" I stared at the words for hours, my mind torn. Had I gone too far, or had I not gone far enough? Sleep evaded me again, and as dawn broke, I realized the truth. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. About proving that I was stronger than the betrayal, stronger than the pain, stronger than the ghosts of the life I should have had. And so, I poured another glass of champagne, looked out over the city, and whispered to the silence, "Not yet, not until they know what it feels like to lose everything." The war wasn't over, it had only just begun. The night after I whispered to the city that the war wasn't over, I realized something terrifying. My enemies weren't done either. For weeks I had been pulling the strings, watching them choke on the threads of their own lies. But snakes don't die easily. They coil, they wait, and when you least expect it, they strike. And my father, my own blood, was the deadliest snake of them all. It began with silence. His calls stopped, his texts stopped, his desperate attempts to explain vanished. At first I thought I had broken him, shattered his pride so deeply that he had nothing left. But then a strange unease started creeping in. Because a man like my father doesn't disappear. He plans, he plots, and I had made myself his target. One evening, as I stepped into my apartment, I noticed the smell first. Cigarette smoke, sharp and invasive, something I never allowed inside my place. My chest tightened. I dropped my keys quietly, scanned the shadows, and then I saw it. A faint red glow in the corner chair. My father, sitting there as if he owned the place, the tip of his cigarette burning like an ember in hell. "Nice of you to finally come home, son," he said, his voice dripping with venom and amusement. Rage flared in me instantly, but I forced myself not to show fear. "How did you get in?" He exhaled smoke slowly, deliberately. "Doors mean nothing when you paid for the lock in the first place." He leaned forward, eyes glinting. "You've made quite a mess. Lawsuits, scandals, investors pulling out. Do you really think you're winning?" I clenched my fists. "I don't think, I know, you're falling apart." His laugh was low, sinister. "You've only scratched the surface. You have no idea how deep my roots go. You've embarrassed me, yes, but you haven't destroyed me, and now it's my turn." Before I could answer, he tossed something onto the table. I looked down and froze. Photos, dozens of them. Me with friends, me at meetings, even me asleep in my own bed. Every angle of my life had been watched. "You're not the only one who knows how to dig," he said, rising from the chair. "Careful, son, you think you're in control, but you're just a child playing with fire, and fire burns." Then he walked out, leaving the smoke and the photos behind like a curse. That night I couldn't breathe. Every shadow felt like an eye, every silence like a threat. For the first time since the altar, doubt consumed me. What if he was right? What if I had underestimated him? But fear quickly hardened into resolve. If he wanted war, I would give him war. I started digging deeper, contacting sources I had sworn I would never use. People in dark corners, people who knew the skeletons buried in his empire, and what I found shook even me. Corruption, bribery, offshore accounts, blackmail schemes. My father's empire was a castle built on rot. I gathered everything, every document, every recording, every witness statement. It was enough to bury him for life, but timing was everything. Release it too early and he'd find a way to spin it. Release it too late and he'd destroy me first. The breaking point came 3 days later, at a gala he hosted to prove he was still untouchable. The city's elite filled the ballroom, champagne glasses glittering under chandeliers. Laughter covering the whispers about his scandals. And then, as he stepped onto the stage to deliver his speech, I made my move. The giant screens behind him flickered, gasps filled the room, and suddenly, instead of his polished image, the screens showed the truth. Leaked recordings of him threatening officials, videos of him with people he had paid to silence, bank statements flashing numbers too large to explain. The entire ballroom turned into a storm of shock, disgust, and outrage. My father froze, his face pale, his hand gripping the podium like it was the only thing keeping him standing. The crowd erupted, shouts, gasps, phones raised to capture every second. In that moment, the man who had once been untouchable was stripped naked before the world. And then I stepped forward, out of the shadows into the light. The room turned toward me, hundreds of eyes burning into my skin. I felt their shock, their hunger for drama, their thirst for truth. My voice cut through the chaos like a blade. This man is not a leader, he is not a father, he is a predator, and tonight the world sees him for what he truly is. The crowd roared, some in outrage, some in awe. My father's face twisted into pure hatred. He tried to speak, but his words were drowned in the noise. Security moved in, whispers of police already rushing through the guests. I thought that was the end, I thought I had won, but then something happened that no one expected. My ex-fiancée appeared. Dressed in black, her hair pinned back, her eyes blazing with fury. She stormed to the stage, grabbed the microphone and screamed, "You think he's the only monster? Tim isn't innocent. He planned this. He set us all up. He's obsessed with revenge, and he'll destroy anyone in his way." The room froze. Cameras turned toward me. Suddenly, I wasn't just the avenger. I was the villain in her story. My father smirked, his last weapon revealed. She wasn't just a betrayer. She was his pawn, and now she was trying to drag me down with him. The crowd erupted into chaos. Questions flew like bullets. My chest tightened, my pulse racing. I opened my mouth to speak, but my father's laughter cut me off. "See," he shouted, his voice echoing through the hall, "the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." That was the moment I realized the final battle wasn't about evidence, money, or power. It was about survival, about who the world would believe. And as the lights blinded me, the cameras flashed, and the crowd screamed, I understood. This war had only one possible ending. One of us would rise, and one of us would fall forever. The night after the gala was chaos. News stations ran my father's downfall on a loop, his face plastered across every screen, his empire crumbling in real time. But the headlines weren't just about him anymore. They were about me, the son who destroyed his father. Hero or monster, the altar avenger. The world couldn't decide whether I was justice incarnate, or just another corrupted heir with a vendetta. And in the middle of that storm, my ex-fiancée's betrayal cut deepest. She hadn't just turned on me, she had become his weapon, his mouthpiece, poisoning every narrative with doubt. While he faced handcuffs, she faced cameras, spinning stories about me, making me look like a manipulator, a puppet master with blood in my eyes. But she underestimated one thing. Once the world tastes blood, it always wants more. And the more she spoke, the more cracks appeared in her performance. People began digging into her as well, and what surfaced was my last card. It was 2 days after the gala when I got the message. Anonymous email, a single video file. I opened it and what I saw made my stomach twist. My father and her, not the affair everyone already knew about, something worse. Footage of them plotting together, discussing how they'd break me, destroy my credibility, leave me with nothing. She wasn't his victim, she was his equal. I knew then what I had to do, the final strike, the one that would silence them both forever. The city courthouse was a fortress that day. My father's arraignment was public, cameras swarming, protesters screaming outside. Everyone wanted to see the fallen king brought to justice. He walked in wearing cuffs, but his smirk was still there, carved into his face like it belonged to him. She was there too, sitting front row, dressed in white, pretending to be purity itself, her eyes locked on me with venom. I had the file loaded ready. I could have leaked it to the press, let them devour it, but no, that wasn't enough. I wanted them to see it unravel with their own eyes, in the very place where justice was supposed to live. When the judge called the session to order, I stood. My voice didn't shake. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I request to submit evidence. Evidence of collusion between the defendant and his accomplice." The room buzzed, the judge raised a brow. "Proceed." And then it played. The video filled the courtroom screens. Their voices crystal clear, their laughter cruel, their plotting undeniable. Gasps rippled through the room like an earthquake, her face drained of color, his smirk faltered for the first time. "Get that off," he roared, lunging against the cuffs, his rage spilling out like poison. She tried to stand, to shout, but the guards held her down. It was over, the world saw the truth, there was no coming back from that. But here's the twist no one expected. The video had something else. Something I hadn't noticed until the crowd reacted, until the judge's gavel slammed down in horror. In their plotting, they mentioned something, someone, a name, my mother. The mother who had vanished from my life years ago. The mother I thought had left us, abandoned me to his shadow. But in the recording my father said, "She knows too much, if she talks we're done." The courtroom froze, my heart stopped. He wasn't just a monster, he had hidden her, silenced her, maybe worse. I felt the world tilt beneath me, all my revenge, all my fury, and I had never once asked the right question: where had my mother gone? The session dissolved into chaos, guards dragging him out, her screaming denial, reporters clawing for every angle, but I didn't hear them. I only heard his words echoing in my skull. "She knows too much." That night I couldn't sleep. The city roared with victory, headlines celebrating the fall of a titan. But inside me, a new war had begun. Because if my mother was alive, if she was out there somewhere, then everything I thought I knew was a lie. And if she was, then my father's sins were darker than I could ever imagine. So I made a choice. Revenge wasn't over. It had only shifted. I would dig deeper. I would unearth the truth. I would find her, alive or buried. And I would not stop until every secret was dragged into the light. As the sun rose, I stood by the window, watching the city pulse with noise and life. My reflection stared back at me. Harder, sharper, forged in fire. "My father may have fallen," I whispered, "but the real story has just begun." And with that I walked out the door, into a future no one could predict, where every ally might be a traitor, every answer a trap, and every step closer to my mother might uncover a secret darker than revenge itself. The world thought the war ended in that courtroom. But for me, it was only the beginning.